Hi everybody, I'm Arthur. I'm an alcoholic, also an addict, recovered. I did this work with a sponsor who found me at a meeting, who had been through this work. I was in Worcester at the Friday night, at that time, Assumption Group meeting, which was up at Assumption College, and I was making coffee, and I thought at that time, I think I was probably 6 months sober or so, and I was suffering from real bad anxiety and depression, and then I met him, and he showed me, talked with me in a manner that was with this solution in mind. And it was different than anybody had ever spoken with me. And I connected with him after I ran from him for a while, because I was scared. At that time, I had a couple sponsors in AA, and he wanted to sponsor me. He made it clear that he wanted to help me. And I had 2 sponsors in AA. I had a long-term sponsor with long-term sobriety, and I had a sponsor who made me feel good when I was upset. That's the total truth. Neither one of which who could really offer me at least this solution. They offered me what they were able to offer me. An ear, a shoulder, a ride if I needed it. They answered the phone, and that was a lot when you're afraid. They offered me friendship. And the gentleman who brought me through this work basically said, look, if I'm going to help you, and I didn't ask him, that was what he said. I never asked him, but he made it apparent he was going to help me. He said, then I can't work with you through work that other people might be doing or may not be doing. So I had to tell them that I was going to work with a new sponsor, and I did, and it was scary, and I started this work. And when I started into this, there's so much here, I had no idea what it was that I was dealing with. I didn't understand the monster of alcoholism. I was so wrapped up in myself that it was a challenge to see past what I felt from moment to moment, from day to day, whether it was sadness or anger or fear. I couldn't comprehend even what it was he wanted to, when he would say things like, you have no idea how deep this runs. I could hear it, but I couldn't understand it. And there's a difference between hearing something and understanding it and knowing it. I couldn't know it. I could hear it and say, yeah, that's a lot, and I could give lip service to it. And it was hard because I could not really, even though everything I'd gone through that led to this point related in some way, shape, or form to another to my drug abuse and my alcohol addiction, even with all that wreckage, it was hard to bring it to the surface and have it on its own open my eyes to the need for something new. And I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense, but that's what I couldn't, I could have people around me say, look at what's happened to you. These are all the reasons why you need to do something different. Your life is a mess, you're a mess. And even with him telling me those things, standing on its own, if that were all that I had to count on, I'm not so sure it would have carried me for very far. I think that prior to meeting my sponsor, that's what I depended upon in open AA to keep me in the chair, was the constant reminder at podiums, parroting my own experience to convince myself why I needed to be here. the experiences are totally different from this work to coming into Open AA and no work. It really was easy to convince myself that I had done a lot of work because I attended 90 and 90. Even though I didn't do any step work. But I was underneath the impression that I had done step work because I attended step meetings. And the belief is that you have been 90 and 90, I imagine, and now you're able to speak on step 1, 2, 3, 4 through 12. And I learned, having done this work, that it's a lie. It's not the truth. And now that I understand that, I'm tasked with the responsibility when I'm in an Open AA meeting to help people understand that it's not the truth. I have information that's not my own. It doesn't personally belong to me. It's rented. That's it. It's just rented information that God has blessed me with through another person because he saw fit to do it, because for some reason he wanted me to advocate on AA's behalf, on his behalf. I'm not sure what behalf. He didn't send it to me yet. I don't know what it looks like. I just know that I'm tasked with it, and I'm responsible now, having been given that, to share that at other meetings. And not with a bat. Not to pummel AA. Not to hammer those who are not here yet. But to be a demonstration of what happens when you get here. And there's a difference to talk from the book, which I did, which cost me, for years when I started in this work, I had this book and would browbeat people out in the Brookfields where I live with step study. And you remember that. And I was afraid. And I was also passionate, and I was excited because I had hope. But to people who don't understand this and haven't done this work this way and have self-created their own mechanisms for doing fourth steps, be it EDIO or, autobiography, to them that's very real, and that may be all they have to offer, and that may be in their mind what actually saved them. So if I go out there and I hammer, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, then they can't hear me. I don't hear that when somebody does it to me. My sponsor didn't do that to me. My sponsor was much more direct and would say things like, I think you're lying. You're fake. Stop being fake. Why are you twitching? Why didn't you answer my phone call? Why are you dodging me? He would ask me things that were real difficult to answer. And they were packed with awareness. And he explained to me that that didn't come from just attendance at meetings. And that's what interested me. So, because he demonstrated, I was interested. And moreover, the demonstration was constant. It was at meetings, it was not at meetings, it was out to dinner, it was at his house folding his laundry with him. It was, and I did do that when I was upset. I would call the sponsor when I was upset and say, hey, can I come over? I need somebody to hear me, to kind of comfort me and tell me it's going to be okay. And when I looked for that with my new sponsor, he would point me towards prayer and laundry. And do things that would not allow me to spotlight an already, extremely overthought and this over concern with myself, which was the root of what led me to stay sick. this inability to come out of myself. Just, the first step is not even, I mean, it really is the snow on top of the iceberg. Like, we're just, in this chapter, I learned establishing how my body is different as it's suggested by the doctor. I start to look at and reflect on my drinking, my drugging, and through prayer and talking with him and reading and lots of contemplation of asking myself whether or not this is true for me, more times than I care to count, while I'm at work, when I wake up, when I go to bed, while I'm sleeping, this constant, do I have this condition, is the function of my sponsor to help me to determine whether or not I even really need to be in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I tried to come to that conclusion through the attendance of a lot of meetings, and 90s and commitments, and for years and years and years in and out of AA, but I just was unable, for me anyways, to come to the conclusion that I really needed to be here, which is the, I guess you could say it's the, it's kind of a, it's the confusion and baffling kind of thing that takes place in alcoholism, is that I had all this experience and all this reason that said I should be here, but despite that, despite the in and out of AA and the suggestion that I might have a problem both in my, in front of me and around me with family members and, experiences in my life that were leading to suggest that there might be a problem there, I couldn't make that conclusion on my own. It wasn't until we started to peel back the layers of this step that I could start to see or realize that I might actually really have a problem. What I'm trying to say is that I spent a long time trying to convince myself of something I never believed in. And as a result of it, I never stayed sober because inside I wasn't really sure I needed to be. I started to think that I might have a problem when my alcohol use went into heavier drug use, and yeah, okay, now I'm in places I don't want to be in, and I don't understand why I'm in places I don't want to be in. I'm doing things that I really don't want to do, and I don't understand why I'm doing things I really don't want to do. At that point, which is the point I arrived to when I met my sponsor here, now I'm open. Maybe there is something going on. No idea it had anything to do with alcoholism, just knew that something was wrong. Sensed something was wrong. So we peeled back the layers of this step, and I had to admit that I was powerless over alcohol, and that I didn't want to admit powerlessness, like it says in here. Nobody wants to. Hardly any of us wanted to admit complete defeat. Hard to admit complete defeat when you're as fully a self as we are. Hard to admit complete defeat when you're the man, when you're it. Who wants to admit that? Are you kidding me? Defeat? What? That's exactly what it was. I lacked the power. At some point in my drinking, I went from a place where I could control it to a place where I couldn't anymore. It didn't matter that I wasn't drinking every day. The ideas that I had in my head about what it meant to be an alcoholic were very shallow. They were very surface, things I saw growing up, So I constructed this idea of what it meant to be an alcoholic, and I wasn't it because I wasn't pushing a carriage down a street with a long brown coat. That's what I constructed. So how could I come here and say I am? But this made it possible because it doesn't look at any of that. The doctors are looking at physical conditions that occur in the body of an alcoholic once they start to drink. That's a little bit more tangible. It's coming from doctors who've practiced in this field, that have studied and realized that, and suggested and theorized to this day, without much debate, that if I put a drink in my body, I'm going to crave more of the same. They're not exactly sure what mechanism fires to make that happen, but that's exactly what happens in me, and that's the function of this chapter, is to determine whether or not that occurs. That's it. You do have to be honest, because if you're I was asking myself, once I started to drink, could I stop? Well, I could stop, even for periods of time, but I'd always retreat back to it, and usually worse than where I left off, to make up for the time I missed in between. That was my thought process. I'm going to go big or go home. Go hard. And that's how I filtered it, I've been good. I didn't do it. No trouble this time. Money in the bank, bills are paid. Happy wife, happy home, I'm gone. Let's celebrate. Let's self-sabotage with an 8-ball and some crack cocaine, and let's not go home for 9 months, which is what happened to me. Nothing rational about that. But in my mind, why is everybody pissed off? That's the way that I think. And the doctor's opinion, in asking myself if I'm honest, does that occur to me? I'm pretty hard-pressed at that point with my experience and my sponsor echoing what I've shared with him back to me. And, I'd be pretty hard-pressed to deny that had happened. And that, I'd lost years doing that. And I could identify with physical craving. I knew what it felt like to not be able to leave the bar. I knew what it felt like at the Irish Times in Worcester at last call to be pissed. Like, are you kidding me right now? There's got to be somebody who's got a case of beer. And I would walk. I would randomly knock on people's doors. I did that on South Main Street, Main and Chandler. I did that because I picked, the rundown, crack-looking like heroin houses, and would locate people those were the tools that you use, I would look at those houses and assume that there are crack heroin addicts in there, and they'll sell me whatever they have. And I would locate what I was after 9 times out of 10. I was real resourceful. I understand how to operate in that environment very well. And I would get what I want and then end up in a basement I didn't know how I got to, with people that didn't know how I got to them, and party until the sun came up, and then kick my ass the whole way home, and then have to explain it, and I'm not at work, and my wife at the phone, at the table, crying, wondering where I've been all night, like again and again and again, ATM slips all over the place, money I shouldn't have spent. No balance, no honesty in that. Completely about Arthur, at the expense of everybody around me. I know that this chapter doesn't say any of that, but it does in its own way. This chapter is quite perfectly written, in my opinion. This chapter is designed to help me determine if I have alcoholism. Phenomenon of craving. Do I have it? Don't try to make the conclusion on your own. If you were able to do things on your own successfully, you wouldn't need God's help. You probably wouldn't have landed here. It's done with a sponsor. It's done through prayer. It's done through honest self-assessment. It's done through, more importantly, a willingness to be something other than what you've been. Because if you're not willing to be something other than what you've been, you're wasting your own time and everybody else's. And that's just the truth. I was willing to be something different. I didn't want to be the guy that I was. There is no reputation in, I did this much crack last night. I drank this much beer. I slept with this many women. There's no honor in that. There's nothing to write home about. I had to change. I was willing to change. So looking at this was a little easier for me because I wanted to change. I didn't want to be the guy that was that guy that I've described. And going through the first chapter and identifying phenomenon of craving, and through prayer and with my sponsor, I was willing to look even deeper at the chapter. And at the time, it was really, I was in a different place then, so it was very fog-like. Like I was really just going through the motions with my sponsor, not knowing what the outcome was going to be, and really latching on to the idea that he's telling me the truth. I'm willing to believe that he's telling me the truth, and if I just do what he says, maybe I'll be okay. At that time, I didn't understand a whole lot, but I could identify with the very basic precept of craving. And because I knew that that existed in me, and I could tell the difference between me and a person where it doesn't exist, like my wife. My wife drinks regularly when she has free time, a glass or two. She has vodka. She's sampling different drinks lately and trying different things, but never, ever has the bullshit that I had. Doesn't experience this, doesn't drink and drive. It feels fine at 2, stops at 2. It doesn't wake up sick. Doesn't plan her weekends around drinking. It's very as it comes. Can do without it. Non-alcoholic. Never develops craving. I start to drink and I don't stop, but I'm in my mind saying I need to stop, and there's somewhere else I need to be, but I'm not getting there. And then I'm in my mind saying, well, I'll do it at this time, but then the time comes and then I break that self-promise. And then I say, I'm not going to spend this much money, but then I'm there and I'm spending that money. I'm doing things against my own will. So where my will is concerned, which this chapter talks about here, where alcohol exists, it's completely and utterly ineffective. If I tell myself to do something and I don't do it, I have no power. And that's what they're talking about. So in this step, all we're doing is considering I learned whether or not I retain that power. If I still have the power within me to make a decision, follow it by an action, and it produces a specific change, well, then I might still have the power, and I might not need AA. But I can't honestly say that on my own I could stop, make a decision to stop, and keep it that way, which is why I'm here. Because I can't keep it that way. I have moments where I keep it that way, but I always come full circle back to it. That's not a person with power. That's a person who's powerless. We admitted that we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. There's no manageability in my life if I'm at an AA meeting. It's not because I live my life manageable. I might do that today. But if I landed here, there's no manageability going on in my life. This is entire psychic change process, behavioral change process. That's what this is. Make no mistake about it. If you're alcoholic, you're sick. And you'll have a brain that'll tell you you're not sick, even though you have 20 years of wreckage that prove that you are. And if your brain says, there's no problem, like the guy who pops up out of the tornado, the seller, and says, there's no problem here, Ma, you're that guy. You're that girl. I'm that guy. Wreckage everywhere, but there's no problem. We have a mattress. Like that kind of thinking, that delusional, dishonest, disingenuous thinking, is the very thing that almost killed me. This is the first step into tearing open that. And the solution, which they make note of in several places early on in this chapter, in nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves. They make it clear the power is not going to come from within your self-will. They're announcing it. If this is true for you, you're going to be looking for something outside of you. There is no middle. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's another mention of what's going to take place. And there's a warning in that entire psychic change, not a half a change. You're going to change the way you think entirely. And if you don't, they warn you by saying, we think there's very little hope for that person's recovery. They go on half paragraph down to remind us again that something more than human power is needed. All through this, they're pointing out for us the roadmap of what it's going to take to get better. But when I read this with my sponsor, I didn't see any of that. All I was focused on was phenomenon of craving. But that's what I see today. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. Question is, can you do that by yourself? Forever. Can you stay away from whatever it is forever? Because if you can't, then you'll probably need the solution. I'm a dead man without this. I like to drug. I like to party. I'm completely bent on self-destruction. On my own. I'm okay with self-destruction. That's my problem. Is that the abnormal is normal to me. You know, it's a twisted thought process that's become untwisted through this work. But it's still part of me, very much a part of me. And I am thankful and really want to hear what other people have to say about this. I feel like I've carried on way too long, but I could go on for days on this step and other steps. Like, honestly, there's so much to say about it and to learn from it. I will end with this. I think the most important thing is the statement of frothy emotional appeal. I understand having tried to hang my own hat on that and having tried to sell it to other people by appealing to them emotionally and passionately about this or something else, that it's futile. You know, it never works. Application works. Show me, don't tell me. It's all about a demonstration. My life has changed as a result of only following the steps and demonstrating what they've asked me to follow. It's not because I thought it was a good idea and just kept thinking it was a good idea for many years. It's because I actually did something. And it's here for us to do, to change the way that we think so that we're not sick anymore. And I hope that if people are concerned here with whether or not they might have a problem, if you resemble anything that I've laid out today, there's a good chance you probably do, and your seat is well earned. And unless you have another way, you might want to be open to at least trying this before you knock it down. And thank you.